rousing end to a raucous day one here in Philadelphia, back here in the Wells Fargo Center, where day two of the Democratic National Convention is upon us, joined by my panel of all-star analysts to break down a fascinating opening day of this convention and look ahead to night two, joined now by Democratic strategist Liz Smith, political contributor and former communications director for Tim Kaine, Linda Tran, and Meg Ansara, the battleground states director for the Clinton campaign, where this figures to be won. Meg, before I get to your particular part then of the business, we just looked at some of the highlights from a day that started rather chaotically, I think, for the party, for the campaign, but ended with a standing ovation as Bernie Sanders left that stage. As you look back then on what we saw yesterday, what'd you make of it?
Well, we thought it was an incredible first start to our convention, and a powerful contrast to the divisiveness and dysfunction that we saw last week in Cleveland. We saw, Senator Sanders and others coming together, a really strong unity message, but also optimism and hope, which we know that voters are looking for.
Had you anticipated the response, especially earlier, though, in the evening when his supporters very fervently were shouting down speakers, required some massaging from some of his supporters at the microphone earlier in the day? In fact, we'd seen Bernie Sanders booed by his own supporters as he said that he would like them to support Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine. Did that initial reaction then surprise you, albeit one that we really didn't hear when he said that Hillary Clinton must become the next president of the United States in the speech?
Yeah, I would say that, primaries are intense. They're designed to be that way. And, I personally think that our party is stronger because of the intense and really purposeful, but also policy-driven debate that we've had. And people feel strongly, and that's to be expected. But what we saw coming out of the night was really strong messages of unity and also just what's at stake with this election. So I think we ended the night strong and really coming together. It
was something he did acknowledge as well, saying that this was democracy. This is the creative tension.
And just to piggyback off of what Meg said, look, most people don't watch the conventions live, right? And how they see it is on the front page of their newspapers. And I think what's important is earlier in the day, we thought maybe the front pages would say disunity, boos, but it ended up being headlines about Sanders' rousing speech, about Michelle Obama's rousing speech. And that's really what matters, because most Americans probably weren't tuning in live. And so I think that's the most important thing that came out of it yesterday.
Well, personally, I would actually argue that tuning in live as well right here is also important. So feel free to marinate in all sorts of media. I want to get to your then particular part of the business. Recent polls, Meg, have shown a tight race between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump in key battleground states, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Florida. Numbers that seemingly surprise a lot of folks when they look at numbers speaking to individual candidates. What do you make of what look to be dead heats within the margin of error in those states?
Yeah, it's exactly right. We're absolutely not taking anything for granted, and know that we've got a lot of work to do between now and November. What we're seeing is that people are looking for change and also looking for a powerful vision for this country that's going to look out for them. We believe that Secretary Clinton can provide that, but we've really got to put the time and the work in, particularly on the ground, talking with voters to talk about what's at stake, but also to motivate and mobilize voters to come out. So it's both about making a choice between Trump and Secretary Clinton, but also, I think, the choice to vote versus not to vote.
Yeah, garnering that Obama coalition is something that is paid much attention. And yet, the demographics suggest perhaps it'll be there, but we were talking about this all day yesterday. This is going to be a turnout election. So how are you specifically going to go about the business of getting people to the ballot boxes?
Yeah, it's a great question. What we do see is that support levels are very, very high with African Americans, with Latinos, with women and young voters. But what we need to do is to make sure that first and foremost they can vote. So we've got a very robust voter registration program happening in many of our battleground states, but also things like taking advantage of early vote in the states that we have them, so that folks have more time and an easier experience getting to the polls.
Yours is certainly a data-driven campaign, and as the battleground states director, I wonder your initial reaction when the Trump campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, seemed to reimagine the idea of the swing state, the battleground state, saying that there may be as many as 20 in play, referring specifically to states such as Connecticut and Oregon, which I think it's fair to say, Drew, took a lot of people by surprise.
Well, first and foremost, we're running a 50-state strategy. So we have staff in all 50 states, D.C. as well. And, part of that comes from the secretary herself, who really believes that this is an opportunity to build the infrastructure of the Democratic Party. So that's something that we're taking seriously. In terms of the Battleground States program, we're really focused on a similar set of states that we saw in 2008 and 2012. There's some differences in terms of demographic changes and also particular appeal that we see for Secretary Clinton. But we're focused on a core set of states that we think are going to be the most efficient pathway to 270.
The campaign has had struggles dealing with the numbers, the unfavorable numbers specific to the candidates' trustworthiness and honesty numbers. What then, if this is in part a 4-day optical event, it is about the crafting of a narrative, to have it begin with the revelations contained in the emails of the hacked emails from the DNC. Did you feel like it put you in something of a hole that you had to dig your way out of?
I think we've got a great plan here. And what we see is that Secretary Clinton is one of the most well-known individuals, particularly politicians in the world, but that actually folks don't know a lot about her, and in particular her accomplishments. And the convention is a really powerful way to tell that story. Tonight's theme is really about putting children and families first, which has been a theme for her entire career. And as a mom myself, with 2 very small kids, that's something that speaks to me. And we're going to hear powerful testimony to that, both from elected leaders, but also, regular everyday folks like you and me, that we think will make a difference for voters.
And a third on the way, we should mention it. An early mazel to you.
Thank you.
From the standpoint of what has now taken a turn perhaps better left to a spy novel, that we now know that U.S. intelligence officials do believe that it was Russia and Russian intelligence agencies responsible for the hack. It had been the working hypothesis of the FBI, which is why they began the investigation in the first place. From a political and a security standpoint, what does it say that a foreign agent could potentially have the impact that this has had to this point on this election?
Yeah, I'd say it's very, very concerning, to have the potential of a foreign government interfering in an American election. And that's why we're, very happy to hear that the FBI is investigating, and I think are deeply concerned, like many others, about, what prompted this, what caused it, and ultimately how it happened.
They said when the emails were dropped by WikiLeaks that this was going to be part 1. Are you concerned about a part 2?
I don't know what's going to happen. I think the whole thing is very concerning. Ultimately, we're very focused on our Battleground States program, and I think average, everyday people are really thinking about kind of, their families, their economic livelihood, and we're focused on having those conversations. But obviously, we're going to follow the investigation closely.
Linda, Liz, I appreciate the studio audience here. For my,
I actually have a question for Meg, if I may.
Quickly.
So, how is organization going to come into play, given your expertise in that area and the contrast between the Trump and Clinton campaigns?
Sure, it's a great question. I mean, we really see that the ground game is one of our core advantages and one that we're leaning into. So following the April 26th primaries, as I mentioned before, we've put staff in all 50 states, but in our battleground states have really invested in a robust organizing program that we think is going to be really critical, because we know that voters are influenced by their neighbors and peers. And so having those everyday conversations on the phone, but particularly at the door, in the living room, through things like a house meeting. Just this week alone, we've got watch parties happening across the states, in homes, in bars, and you name it, different places where folks can not only watch the speeches but really talk about them, and that's what we found really makes the difference.
Quickly, Meg, one Republican official in Cleveland told me that essentially that using the word campaign to describe the Donald Trump campaign is being generous, that essentially they have a candidate, an advance team, and a Twitter feed. Does the lack of a conventional ground game on the part of the GOP, does it surprise you?
look, I'm not going to comment on their campaign strategy and what they're doing with their resources, but we do have a lot of pride in terms of what we're doing. In particular, our ability to engage just a lot of volunteers that we think will take an active role in this campaign, but hopefully future campaigns to come.
Meg Ansara, we appreciate you. Got a big few months ahead of you for any number of reasons. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.